Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Topics. I'm Kate with the Creative Coast here on the coast of Georgia, where we work to catalyze the innovation economy by supporting local entrepreneurs through social and educational programming. Each month, we host two of these lunchtime topics where we feature a business expert who shares their wisdom with our local entrepreneurial community. Last month, we had Dwayne Stevens on. I think it was last month. He's actually in here today. And he talked about the reality of entrepreneurship and local opportunities for entrepreneurs to seek out the right coaching to help them, decide if they want to launch a business. And kind of playing off that today, we're talking about 8 things to consider before you launch a business. And we brought on another successful entrepreneur who knows all about the ups and downs of starting a business and maintaining it, sustaining it. So today's guest is Tim Mercer. Tim is the CFO and managing partner of a business consulting firm that in 2019 ranked number 357 on Inc. 500's annual list of fastest growing companies with a growth rate of 1,412%. His company has accrued over $70 million in revenue since its inception in 2008. And he's an accomplished business executive and author with over 20 years experience in government contracting and commercial financing. And Tim is the author of Amazon's #1 best-selling book, Bootstrap Millionaire, and has been featured in various media publications, including Forbes, Entrepreneur, and Inc. magazine. So I'm sure y'all have all heard of those. So welcome, Tim. Thanks for being here today.
No, thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit more about your background and how you became an entrepreneur, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm originally from a very small town in South Carolina, a rural town in South Carolina. So I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. So as you could probably imagine back then, growing up in a rural town of South Carolina, my family wasn't wealthy. We probably wasn't even considered to be middle class. Our family was more laborers. We worked in the tobacco fields and the factories there in South Carolina. So entrepreneurship was something that I probably couldn't even have spelled entrepreneurship back then. I really didn't know much about it. But growing up in those type of environments, I certainly had a desire to want more for my life and for my family. And for me, my path started by going in the military. I didn't really have the grades and certainly didn't have the money to be able to go straight from high school to college. So I went into the military, which was great because it opened up my mind to a lot of opportunities and what was out there. Ultimately, that experience in the military got me to end up going to college here in Atlanta, DeVry University, during the mid-90s, and got into the field of technology, which was really a great thing because it was right around the technology boom days. Started working for a company in corporate America worked in corporate America for maybe about a year or so. But I quickly realized that for me personally, a Black male growing up, coming from the South, with an accent the way I have, thick Southern accent, it was just very difficult for me. I didn't see a path for me to work up the corporate ladder, right? And I realized that really wasn't the path for me. So I got into independent contracting because I was able to leverage the skills that I learned, the technology skill, and I started doing independent consulting, which I would consider to be my first try at entrepreneurship. I like to tell people entrepreneurship to me consists of 3 to 4 phases, right? You're either a solopreneur, which that's what I was as an independent contractor, or either a business owner, hopefully working your way up into some level of success if you have a much larger business, or you could possibly be what I like to call an entrepreneur, right? Which is someone who may not necessarily run the business, but work with other small businesses, to partner with them and to help them to be able to realize their dreams and goals and aspirations of that business. But my first introduction to entrepreneurship started when I got into independent contracting.
Nice. So let's talk about this topic in particular, 8 things to consider before starting a business. Can you tell us why you're passionate about this topic and sharing your wisdom on this?
Well, I think I'm just passionate about finance in general. As I said, growing up in the environment that I grew up in, growing up watching my siblings, cry at night because they didn't have, any food to eat, right? Or seeing my family being taken advantage of because of their lack of financial literacy. That is what motivated me to wanted to learn more about finance and wanted to learn more ways in which how I can better myself and to be able to really just try to get my family out of the situations, the financial situations that they were in. So I think that's what that triggered the passion. But over time, I began to realize that I want to be able to also give back, right, and let other, particularly underprivileged young men and women, know that they can too achieve financial success, right? And obviously, you have to put in the work. You have to have goals and dreams and visions and aspirations, but you just don't get stuck in the current environment that you're in. So my passion really is derived from the experience that I've gone through, but more importantly, the desire to be able to show other people that they too can achieve it. They too can defy the odds, as I talk about in my book. Defying the odds and overcoming those challenges that they may have in their lives.
Well, we're glad to have you here to talk about this today. And, I'm going to delve right into those 8 things that you want people to know about, the things that you went through and had to face before you got successful with your business. So you wrote an article for Startup Nation and you said, I consider business to be as mentally and physically draining as any competitive sport. So can we talk about that? What the emotional and physical drain means in entrepreneurship and why people need to consider that.
Well, I mean, I compare business to a competitive sports because business is competitive, right? I mean, it's interesting how you see people on social media nowadays saying, "Hey, I want to help you grow your business, help you," but in the end, business is a competitive sport. I mean, all businesses are fighting for financial success and they're fighting for those customers, right? So, and with that being said, you as a business owner, small business owners, you're gonna spend a lot of sleepless nights, right? You're gonna spend a lot of time working, on your business or working in your business. So it can be very emotional, physical, financially draining, right, for you. And I wanted people to understand that they had to prepare themselves for that type of thing, right? I mean, there were times where if you're sleeping 2 hours a day, right, because you've been up all night long, either working on a business plan or doing something for your business, and especially if you have family and kids and maybe a spouse, you have to juggle all of that at the same time. So it is very stressful. It can be very stressful. It can be very hard, especially in the early stages of growing a business, because I think I consider, building a business is almost like, having a child, right? You have to spend time with it. You have to nurture it. You have to really put everything you have into it. So I just wanted people to understand that is as rewarding as it can and will be, there's a lot of sacrifices you have to make.
Yeah, I like that you brought up family too, because that's a whole nother consideration. I mean, you hear a lot of people, I've heard people say this, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on it. If you can start a business in your 20s versus, after you're married and you've got kids to take care of, that's the way to go. What do you think about that? And do you think there's still, I mean, obviously you can still do it after you have family, but it's probably, I mean, in my experience, it's a lot harder.
Oh, absolutely. I tell people all the time, I truly believe that you should start a business early in your life, right? Where you don't have all those responsibilities. Because what happens, or what I've seen and what I've experienced, is that you start having competing priorities, right? Obviously, you have a family. If you got a family, you got a spouse, you have kids. Those priorities are going to compete with your business. And sometimes you have to make the decision that I have to work on my business. I may not be able to go to the kids' soccer game, right? Or when you're trying to manage the money, right? Money's coming into your business, but you're trying to manage that money because some of that money needs to go towards helping build the business. Some of the money you need for your, just live on and your family. So there are times where me and my wife, we didn't have Christmas, right? I would have to tell her, look, this year we're not going to have Christmas, and those are the type of decisions you have to make, and your family have to be on the same page. They have to understand that you're making those sacrifices for the good of the entire family. And I think it just can be very difficult, trying to do that if everyone in your family is not on the same page.
Makes sense. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you this question later, actually, when we get down to it. I just thought of another one, but I think we can save that for a little later. So you also talk about risk and being able to embrace it. We all embrace it. And we all know there's risk with entrepreneurship, but can you elaborate on what this means exactly by embracing risk?
Well, we're all afraid of taking risk, right? At least I'll speak for myself. When I was growing up, people would tell you to not take risk, right? And so, but if you're going into business, you have to be a risk taker, right? Because you won't know all the answers. There is no guarantees, right? I often hear people always ask, well, what is the guarantee? Well, there is no guarantee in business. You may make a decision and you made the best decision that you can make at that time, but things may change, right? Situations may change. You may have to pivot. Maybe the direction in which you were going in initially, now you have to change direction, right? And when you talk about making risk with regards to money, which is probably the biggest risk, you have to put money out there, sometimes not realizing if it's going to bring you back a return. So I've learned that you have to embrace that, right? You can't be afraid of it. You have to embrace it. You have to know and realize that, okay, if I take a chance here, I may not necessarily get that immediate return that I'm looking for. And even if I lose, right, even if I take a loss, there's still something to be learned from the loss, right? I often tell people in business, you're going to fail. There's no question about it, right? You're going to fail, right? You just need to fail fast, right? You need to fail fast enough so that you can learn from that failure and move on, right? I look at business like a baseball, right? Baseball, in the game of baseball, they said that, I believe they say that a good batter hits like 300, right? Now think about that. A 300 batting average in baseball is actually a very good batting average. That means that he struck out 7 times, right? So, and it's the same way in business. You may have a batting average of 300. I started over about 15 businesses over the course of the past 20 years. Only 2 of them really had success. So that's just the nature of the game. And you have to embrace that and realize that that's the risk that you're going to take, that everything that you do won't succeed, but you just have to keep pushing forward.
So this is something, this next topic, I feel like a lot of people don't really consider when they're starting to sell a product or service, or they're starting a business based on a product or service. It doesn't matter what it is. Selling is a huge component of being an entrepreneur. And you've called it the most important skill you will need as an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes people go into a business thinking, I've got this great product. It's going to sell itself. Or I know my services are needed. It's going to just, and sometimes, I guess there are cases where that's happened. You got a really great product. You've got very few competitors. You're the first. Those are very rare circumstances, right?
Very rare, very rare.
But okay, so for someone who thinks, gosh, I'm really bad at sales, what are some ways that people can develop their sales skills?
Well, from my experience, it just, you have to just dive into it, right? When I first started out in business, I didn't like to sell either, right? I was afraid of being rejected, right? And that's really what we're afraid of. We're afraid of being of rejection, right? We're afraid of people telling us no. Those are the things that we're afraid of, because the realization of it is that no money changes hands unless something is sold, right? I don't care what industry or field that you're in. You can be in the medical field, right? You know, medical field is a great field because you're helping people, right? You're providing them with a service that is helping them. But even in the medical field, something has to be sold, right? Pharmacies would not be on the corners if they weren't selling these drugs to people, right? So we have to embrace selling because that's the only way that you're going to make money, right? And for me, I learned it by just diving in. I encourage people to first, if you're afraid of selling, join a direct sales organization, right? I joined network marketing early in my career. I didn't do well with it, right? But it taught me how to deal with rejection. It taught me how to be a forward thinker, how to manage the expectations of my customers. It taught me those skills, those soft skills that I needed. So even though I didn't make a lot of money in it, I gained those soft skills that was needed to help me in the other side of entrepreneurship, you know, which is what I started doing, but I became an independent contractor, and then of course started growing my businesses. So I encourage people to just dive in, find a direct sales organization, read books on sales skills, but even reading those books and going to conferences, experience is always the best teacher. And sometimes you just have to dive into it and start doing it. And that's the only way you're going to overcome your fear of it is just by doing it.
So what are your suggestions for aspiring entrepreneurs who think they have that great product or service, but don't actually know whether or not there is a need for their business?
Right. Well, I'll first say that the Bible says that there's nothing new under the sun, right? And that's a verse that I've always remembered, and it is so true. Because if you think you have the only product out there, especially in the day and age we live now, you and I could be sitting right here and think of a business idea, and I guarantee if you go and Google it, someone already got some information out there on it, right? So that's the first thing I think we need to realize, is that you or I would never have a product or service that no one else has, right? So we can't be afraid of competition, right? But what you can do is you have to do your market research to figure out, okay, how can I position this product or service in a way that is beneficial to maybe a small segment of that customer base? You've often heard people say the riches are in the niches, right? Where you have to niche down, right? So if you're too broad and too general in your business, you know, it's just gonna be overwhelming, right? But if you begin to niche down and you begin to say, hey, I have this product or service that I think is great, but I'm now just gonna focus this on a smaller segment of the market, right? Smaller segment of market. And I'm gonna get good at selling this to that small segment of the market, because now I can focus on understanding the pain points of that small segment of the market. And then when I get good at doing that, and I start and building a brand around that, then I can then start expanding into other markets. So start small first and bring that product and service to a smaller market rather than trying to bring it to the masses.
Okay, so another point you mentioned in your article is that it might be better for someone interested in running a business to buy an existing business over starting a new one. Why is that?
Well, if you have the means of doing so, I certainly believe it's better to buy a business than to start one, right? Especially if you have the means to do it. Most of us don't necessarily have the means to buy a business. That's why we typically start one. And one of the main reasons, because if you're buying an existing business, that business has probably already gotten past those hurdle years, right? Those growing pain years. The business already has a customer base, or should already have a customer base built. You probably already have a brand awareness around the business. You already have the supply chain, all those things that you need for the business to succeed. An existing business already hasn't built. So if you have the means to do so, it's actually a better return on your investment if you buy that business, right? And just take over that business, and because you're going into it and making money from day one, right? Especially if you buy it right. Now, building a business, I mean, it typically takes 5 to 7, maybe even 10 years before you start even making any real money from when you're building a business, because you got to go through those growing pains. You have to learn what your market is like. You have to understand who your competitors are. You have to build out the supply chain. You have to get all of your capital in place. All those things that you're going to need, those things take time. So if you can circumvent that by acquiring a business, and if you have the means to do so, I encourage people to do that.
Okay. So this is one of my favorite points you have made. You talk about having enough funding set aside for yourself to survive while you're trying to get your business off the ground. And I've talked to business owners who have opted to quit their jobs with no plan or backup. They're like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to quit my job with nothing lined up, no savings.
Yeah.
And there's some people that, they can't help it. They were laid off during the pandemic or during a recession. And so they just jump into entrepreneurship. That's a different story. But in my opinion, quitting your job or not having stable income and starting businesses beyond risky. What are some suggestions you have to help aspiring entrepreneurs prepare financially?
Well, I've gotten that question before because I have a finance company. So people will come and ask me about, how can I start a business and I don't have any money? And I tell them you can't. That's just the realization of it. Because you need more money than just the money to jumpstart the business, because that's just startup capital, right? Yeah, you may get the startup capital, you may go out and get a loan and get the startup capital, but what about the money? How are you going to live while you're actually trying to build that business? And what ends up happening is that you see people actually taking from the business, right? As they're growing the business, as they're making money, they start taking from the business and trying to live off of. But then the business now goes lacking, and the business doesn't have enough funding to sustain itself. So I encourage people, build up some capital, build up some savings, right? There's nothing wrong with working for someone. There's nothing wrong with working in corporate or going and partnering with someone and maybe working in a business with someone else, because now you don't have to take on those financial liabilities and risks, and allows you to be able to save your money and get you to the point where you now can branch out on your own. Now, for me, when I started as an independent consultant, I was the consultant, right? I was the one that's out there doing the work, right? That's why I said I was a solopreneur, right? I'm in business for myself and by myself. I was the one doing the work. But I knew that I couldn't scale my business by being a solopreneur, because I can only do but so much work. And so when I decided that I wanted to move into small business ownership, right, I then stopped doing independent consultant work, and I was making a great income. I was making $250,000 to $300,000 a year as an independent consultant. But when I went and became a small business owner, because I wanted to grow my business, bring on staff, employees, and expand, I had to cut my salary down to $50,000 a year, right? And I had some savings, from independent consulting, but I reduced my salary so that the business would have enough income to survive those next 5 to 6 years. And so that's why you need to have capital and access to capital. So I encourage people to save the money, right? Enough money where that can carry you for at least 2 years if your business doesn't make any money, right? Because you may run into that situation, right? And then while you're doing that, start preparing yourself and start putting things in place for your business so that you can start getting capital for your business, right? Start figuring out how to separate your personal income and your personal credit from your business so that your business has enough credit to stand on its own, because there's a process to doing that. You can do those things while you're preparing yourself to go into entrepreneurship. And that would be my advice.
Yeah, I heard somebody say this recently, is make your money work for you.
Yes.
Instead of spending all that, make your money work for you, right? And go to put people in place that can help execute on your business and scale.
Absolutely. And think about this. You should be your first investor, right? I often have people come and say, hey, I want to start a business. I need investors. But they don't have any of their own money in the deal. No
Right.
investor is going to invest in your business when you are not the first investor. So how do I become the first investor? I have to invest my own money that I've saved, money that I put aside. I have to become that first investor. So when I became my first investor and I started making my business, started generating money and I can show a track record of success, that's when I was able to go out and get other capital partners like banks and institutional partners who would give me funding for different things because they saw that I had skin in the game.
How much do you think, and this goes back to my question about risk, but it all ties together with finances. So I heard Dolly Parton, it was yesterday actually, she was talking about how she wasn't afraid of jumping out there and taking a risk financially because she was dirt poor growing up in Tennessee. Yep. And, you talked a little bit about your background. You said, you weren't middle class, but, there were some days your siblings, they weren't eating. So do you think that really lent to your mindset of like, I don't really have anything to lose except for, I have everything to gain? Because that's what Dolly Parton said is, I didn't have anything to lose and I had everything to gain. That's what she
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when, I often hear people use the term intimate fasting, right? You hear that term going around, especially like diets and things like that, mm-hmm. Tell people, hey, to do intimate fasting. But I was doing intimate fasting as a kid, not because I wanted to lose weight, it's because we just never had anything to eat, right? So when you learn those things and when you learn how to sacrifice and you learn how to stretch a dollar, as people would often say, right? You learn how to do those things. So when you get into business or you get to the point where you have opportunities and things, the way I looked at it, hey, if this thing fails, well, only thing I'm going to do is, what's the worst that can happen is that I fall back to an experience that I've kind of known in the past, right? I know how to live off of practically nothing. So for someone who's never experienced that, I can imagine that they wouldn't want to take any risk because they wouldn't want the feeling of going through something like that. But when you've already been there and you already know what the bottom feels like, then the only thing you know is that the only way I can go is up, right? Because I already know what the bottom feels like, right? I already know what the that valley experience is going to feel like. So only thing I can do is to keep pressing forward towards the mountaintop.
So let's talk exit strategy now. You also said in that article for Startup Nation, you said always start a business with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, basically, for me, it means that nothing good, nothing, in my opinion, lasts forever, right? And when I mean by starting it with the end in mind, doesn't mean that the end is that that it's going to fail or the end is that I'm just going to leave the business. The end in mind is what is your exit strategy when you get to the point where you may want to exit, right? Some people exit by selling a business. Some people exit by transitioning that business to a family member or a friend. The hope is that if you build a successful business, it's a great thing that you have the opportunity to be able to exit, right? Because that means that business has succeeded, right? It could be that you're exiting out of that particular line of business and you're transitioning or pivoting into another space or another area of business. So just having a goal for where you want to see your business in the next 10 years, right? In the next 10 years, if my business achieves what I'm looking for it to achieve in 10 years, do I want to sell it, right? Do I want to transition it in and let my family, my kids or someone take over? Because when you know that up front, then the things that you're doing over those 10 years and building the business, there's different things that you're going to do when you're building a business to sell versus building a business to transition to your kids, right? Or to keep it as part of your an asset for your family, right? Because if you're building it to sell, you're building it with certain goals in mind, certain revenue goals and things of that nature to make it attractive to investors. But if you're building it for it to be a legacy that stays in your family, where you're building it from a totally different perspective, right? I mean, yeah, you planning to making money, but making the real huge amounts of money and things of that nature may not be the ultimate goal, right? And because some businesses that are built to sell, they're all focused on the top line revenue, right? They don't really care about the profit, right? You see that happen nowadays with major corporations. They're concerned about the top line revenue because that top line revenue is what's going to attract investors to them. Whereas if you're building it for an inheritance, then you obviously you're focusing on the net profit, and you're focusing on having forever customers and things of that nature.
Gotcha. So I want to talk about this eighth consideration. You were interviewed by Value Walk for an article on fear, and you talked about how fear can block you from succeeding in entrepreneurship and business. Can you share some tips for overcoming fear and pushing forward?
Well, I want to first say that fear is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I believe fear keeps you honest. It actually keeps you on your toes, for lack of better words. It keeps you alert, right? I mean, we've been taught that fear is really a bad thing, but just fear a lot of times just comes from not knowing, right? It's the fear of the unknown, because if I don't know something, if I don't know enough about a particular thing, it's gonna give me fear. It's gonna give me fear for actually doing it. So the first thing I believe is to gain the knowledge, right, around that particular area, right? If I want to invest in real estate, for example, right, and I don't know a lot about real estate, of course I'm gonna be fearful of it because I don't know enough about it. So I first have to get knowledge around it, right? Find out the pros and the cons, because in any particular thing, there's always pros and cons. And there's nothing wrong with having the cons. I just need to know what the con is so that I can know how to manage it, right? So gaining knowledge obviously is the first thing to do. And I think just facing it head on, right? Because the fear is not going to go away. I mean, I wake up every morning fearful, right? Even after 20 years of being in business, I still wake up with fear because, I got to maybe have a business deal that I'm working on, or, a client that I'm dealing with, and it creates anxiety, right? So that anxiety would never go away. I just learned how to manage it. And I think that's what we have to learn how to do, figure out how to manage it. And I think it starts with gaining the knowledge. And it also starts with, those things that we talked about earlier about, having that personal balance, right? I mean, for me, I try to do things to help me personally, working out or doing yoga, things that can kind of help strengthen my mind mentally and physically, because that, of course, will help me to be able to manage those fears as well.